My name is Elias Thorne. I'm not a soldier, and I'm not a prepper. I don't have a bunker filled with MREs. Until 3 days ago, the most dangerous thing I did was drink service station coffee at 3 a.m. I'm a water treatment operator. For 10 years, I worked the graveyard shift at the Riverside Municipal Facility, 6 miles outside the city limits. My job was to make sure that when 2 million people turned on their taps in the morning, something clean came out. I spent my nights alone in a cavernous building filled with roaring pumps, sedimentation tanks the size of football fields, and the constant, stinging smell of chlorine gas and ozone. It's strange what you miss when the world breaks. I miss the noise. The facility was never quiet. It hummed. It was a physical vibration that worked its way through the soles of your work boots and settled into your bones. It was the sound of 50 million gallons of raw river water being muscled through 12-foot steel mains, forced through sand filters, and injected with chemicals until it was sterile enough to drink. I knew the rhythm of that place better than my own heartbeat. I could tell you which high-lift pump was running just by the pitch of the wine in the break room. That Tuesday night started like any other. Tuesday into Wednesday, the dead center of the week. The shift change at 11 p.m. was the usual shuffle of tired bodies in the locker room, guys anxious to get home, trading places with guys anxious about the 8 hours of solitude ahead. By midnight, I was alone in the control center. It was a glass-walled room suspended above the main pump floor, glowing with monitors showing flow rates, turbidity levels, and reservoir heights. It felt like the bridge of a very slow, very damp spaceship. The first hour was routine. I ran the hourly lab samples, checking pH levels and residual chlorine. I walked the catwalks over the flocculation basins, watching the massive paddle wheels slowly churning the dark water, encouraging the dirt to clump together and sink. It was hypnotic work. Peaceful, in an industrial sort of way. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an alarm bell. It was my coffee cup. I was sitting at the main console at 1:14 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I had just logged the influent flow rate, and I set my ceramic mug down on the metal desk. The surface of the black coffee didn't settle. It kept rippling. At first, I thought it was pump number 4. 4 was an older unit, a massive centrifugal beast that had developed a slight wobble in its main bearing a month ago. Maintenance had it slated for overhaul, but they were waiting on parts. When 4 was running hard, it could send a shudder through the whole concrete foundation of the building. I checked the monitors. Pump 4 was offline. It was in standby mode. I leaned back in my chair, watching the dark liquid in the mug continue its nervous, tight little vibration. It wasn't the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of machinery. It was faster, deeper. It felt like the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped 10 points. My ears popped. A sensation crawled up the back of my neck, that primitive brainstem warning that says, "Predator." But there were no predators here, just concrete, water, and electricity. I stood up and walked to the glass wall overlooking the pump floor below. It was a cavernous space, lit by high-pressure sodium lamps that gave everything a sickly yellow-orange tint. The 4 active main pumps were lined up like green giants, roaring away, pulling the river into the plant. Everything looked normal, but it sounded wrong. Underneath the mechanical roar, there was a new sound. It was low, below the range of normal hearing, something you felt in your chest cavity more than you heard. It sounded like heavy stones being ground together deep underwater. I grabbed my hard hat and my radio off the desk. I needed to go down to the floor. If a main bearing on one of the active pumps was seizing, I had minutes before it tore itself apart and threw shrapnel the size of engine blocks through the casing. I took the metal grate stairs down from the control room. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt. The vibration grew intense. By the time my boots hit the concrete of the main floor, the railings on the stairs were singing, a high-pitched metallic resonance. I walked toward Pump 2. It was running hot. I could smell the ozone coming off its massive electric motor. I put my hand on the casing housing to check the vibration temp. It was hot, hotter than usual, but it wasn't vibrating any more than the floor itself. That's when I realized the noise wasn't coming from the machines. The machines were just victims of it. The noise was coming from the earth. The concrete slab beneath my feet, 4 feet deep, reinforced with rebar thicker than my thumb, shifted. It wasn't a sway. It wasn't the rolling motion they describe in California earthquakes. This was a drop. It felt like the entire building had suddenly fallen 6 inches straight down. The sound that followed was deafening. It was the shriek of metal that was never meant to bend, suddenly bending. Above me, the overhead crane system, used for lifting the pumps during maintenance, swung wildly. Its heavy chains clashed together like church bells in a hurricane. I grabbed the railing of Pump 2 to keep my feet. The lights flickered. The yellow sodium glow pulsed, died for a terrifying second of absolute darkness, and then surged back on, brighter than before. Then the alarms started. It began with a high-water alarm in the raw sewage intake, a nasty, blaring klaxon that echoed off the concrete walls. Then the pressure warnings for the main discharge lines joined in. The control panel on the floor level lit up like a Christmas tree, every indicator flashing angry red. "Control to Central," I yelled into my radio, trying to raise the automated dispatch system over the din. "We have a seismic event. Major equipment trip. I'm initiating emergency shutdown procedures." Static. Just white noise. The repeater tower on the roof must have misaligned. I had to manually trip the main breakers. If the pumps kept running while the pipes they were connected to were twisting out of alignment, we'd have a catastrophic rupture. A 60-inch water main under 80 pounds of pressure doesn't just leak. It explodes. It can cut a man in half. The breaker panel was on the far wall, 50 yards away across a floor that was currently trying to buck me off like a rodeo horse. I started running, stumbling, keeping one hand on the machinery as I passed it. I was halfway there when the sound changed again. The grinding roar stopped for a split second, replaced by a sound like a cannon shot inside a tunnel. Boom! The building shuddered violently. A blast of freezing cold, wet air hit me from the north end of the hall. I didn't have to look at the monitors to know what happened. The main 90-inch intake pipe, the artery that brought the river into the plant, had just sheared clean off where it entered the building's foundation. I stopped running. You don't outrun that amount of water. I turned to look. The north wall wasn't there anymore. It was a wall of black water, foaming and angry, smashing into the pump room. It hit the first line of pumps and swallowed them whole. The electrical systems on the motors shorted out with blinding blue-white flashes of arcing electricity and plumes of acrid smoke. The lights died for good. The emergency floodlights kicked on, weak, battery-operated beams that cut narrow slices through the chaos. The water was already at my knees, freezing cold and thick with river mud. The current was incredible. It slammed me against the casing of Pump 3, knocking the wind out of me. I felt a sharp crack in my ribs. Survival instinct took over. The breakers didn't matter anymore. The plant didn't matter. I had to get up. The control room. It was elevated 20 feet above the floor. I fought the current, wading back toward the metal stairs I'd just descended. The water was rising terrifyingly fast, waist-deep now, churning around my legs, heavy and impossible to fight. Debris, pallets, oil drums, tools, washed past me in the dark. An empty 50-gallon chemical drum slammed into my thigh, nearly taking me down. If I fell, I knew I'd never stand up again. The weight of the water would pin me to the concrete until I drowned. I reached the stairs. The bottom 3 steps were already submerged. I hauled myself up, my wet boots slipping on the metal grating. I climbed fast, gasping for air, the pain in my side flaring with every breath. I made it to the catwalk level just as the water swallowed the tops of the massive pumps below. The noise below was muffled now, a deep, turbulent churning. The electrical arcing had stopped because everything was underwater. I stumbled into the control room. It was dark, lit only by the red emergency lights and the dying glow of the UPS battery backups on the computer monitors. The screens were a sea of red error messages. System failure. Connection lost. Critical pressure drop. Critical level alarm. The floor of the control room was vibrating violently. The earthquake, or whatever this was, wasn't stopping. It wasn't a 30-second event. It was continuous. The glass wall overlooking the pump room was bowing inward, spiderwebs of cracks shooting across the surface as the building settled unevenly. I knew I couldn't stay there. The control room was suspended steel. If the supports gave way, I'd ride the whole structure down into the black water below. I needed an exit that didn't lead down. There was a fire door at the back of the control room that led to an external metal staircase on the east side of the building, used for roof access and smoking breaks. I jammed my shoulder into the door. It was stuck, the frame torqued by the shifting foundation. I slammed against it again, ignoring the screaming ribs, putting all my weight into it. It popped open with a screech of metal. I fell out onto the external landing. The cold night air hit my wet uniform, instantly chilling me to the bone. I grabbed the railing and looked out. The facility was built in a low-lying area near the river basin. Usually, from this vantage point, I could see the lights of the highway overpass a mile away and the soft glow of the suburban sprawl beyond that. I couldn't see the highway lights. I looked down. The emergency lights on the side of the building illuminated the parking lot below. My truck, a 10-year-old F-150, was gone. The pavement where I had parked it was gone. A fissure, easily 20 feet wide, had opened up in the earth, running directly beneath the east wing of the plant and out into the lot. The ground hadn't just cracked. One side of the fissure had dropped 4 feet below the other. I looked further out, toward the city. The horizon was wrong. It was tilted. The faint glow of the city lights was sputtering. Entire grids were going dark in domino fashion as I watched. A massive blue explosion lit up the sky to the south. A substation goes up. Then another. The grinding noise from deep underground continued, a relentless, sickening vibration that made the steel grating beneath my feet feel like it was dissolving. I stood there on that metal platform, freezing wet, listening to the death groans of the machinery I had tended for a decade, and I realized the terrifying truth. The pump failing wasn't the disaster. The intake pipe bursting wasn't the disaster. Those were just symptoms. The ground itself had turned traitor. I wasn't looking at a bad night at work. I was looking at the end of the world as it had been built. I stood on that metal grate landing for maybe 30 seconds. It felt like an hour. The human brain has a funny way of prioritizing things when the adrenaline hits. You'd think my first thought would be my family, or the millions of people in the city who just lost their water supply. But it wasn't. My first thought was that I had left my car keys on the desk in the control room. Then I looked down at the fissure that had swallowed the parking lot, and the absurdity of that thought hit me like a slap. Keys didn't matter. The truck didn't matter. The ignition cylinder was probably crushed flat under 20 tons of asphalt and clay. The external staircase was bolted to the side of the treatment building with heavy-duty anchors. As I watched, The bolt nearest my left boot sheared off. It made a sound like a gunshot. Crack, and the head of the bolt flew past my shin, spinning into the dark. The entire staircase lurched 3 inches away from the wall. That woke me up. The building was dying. The foundation had been undercut by the water main break, and the vibrations from the earth were shaking the structure apart. If I stayed attached to it, I was going down with it. I started down the stairs. I didn't run. Running is how you break an ankle, and a broken ankle tonight meant you stayed exactly where you fell. I took the steps one by one, gripping the freezing railing with a hand so tight my knuckles turned white. The metal was slick with condensation and mist from the ruptured main. Every step vibrated. It wasn't just the machinery dying inside. It was the ground. It was a low-frequency hum that traveled up through your legs and settled in your stomach. It felt like standing on the deck of a ferry in rough water, that constant, nauseating sense of the floor rolling beneath you. I hit the ground level, or what was left of it. The bottom landing of the stairs was twisted, hovering a foot above the dirt. I jumped. My boots hit mud. Not the packed gravel of the access road, but thick, sucking clay. The fissure had torn through the drainage ditches, and the groundwater was rising up to meet the river water. I needed to get away from the building. I turned south, toward the perimeter fence and the county road beyond it. The darkness was absolute. The cloud cover was thick, blocking the moon, and with the city grid down, there was no ambient light pollution. It was the kind of dark that feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing against your eyes. I fumbled for the small tactical flashlight I kept on my belt. I clicked it on. The beam cut a tight, white cone through the mist. What I saw stopped me cold. The landscape hadn't just shifted, it had been chewed up. The perimeter fence, 10-foot chain link topped with razor wire, was gone. In its place was a ridge of earth, pushed up like a wrinkle in a rug, maybe 6 feet high. The ground had compressed, buckling upward. I climbed the ridge, my boots sliding in the wet soil. The smell hit me then. It wasn't just the chlorine from the plant anymore. It was the smell of deep earth. You know that scent when you dig a hole for a fence post? That damp, heavy smell of worms and decay and old roots? Multiply that by 1,000. It was the smell of soil that hadn't seen the air in 10,000 years, suddenly exposed. And under that, something sharper. Sulphur. I crested the ridge and shone my light down onto the county road, or where County Road 9 should have been. The asphalt was shattered. Not cracked, shattered. It looked like someone had taken a hammer to a pane of glass. Massive slabs of blacktop were jutting up at 45-degree angles. I navigated through the ruin of the road, stepping from slab to slab. I had to be careful. The gaps between the asphalt chunks were deep, revealing dark, empty spaces below. Sinkholes were opening up as the soil liquefied. I was shivering violently now. My uniform was soaked through with freezing river water, and the air temperature was dropping. It had to be near freezing. Hypothermia is a quiet killer. It doesn't scream at you. It just makes you tired. It makes you want to sit down and close your eyes for a minute. I knew the symptoms. I knew I had maybe an hour of exposure before my decision-making skills started to degrade. I needed shelter. I needed dry clothes. I remembered the maintenance depot. It was a small satellite structure, a corrugated steel shed about a quarter-mile down the road, used by the county crews to store salt spreaders and road signs. I started walking. The silence was the worst part. The roaring of the plant was behind me now, fading into the distance. In its place was a silence so profound it made my ears ring. No highway hum. No airplanes. No distant sirens. Just the wet slap of my boots and the occasional groan of a tree falling deep in the woods as its root system gave way. I reached the depot 10 minutes later. It was still standing, though it leaned precariously to the left. The padlock on the door was heavy, hardened steel. I didn't have a key, and I didn't have bolt cutters. But I had adrenaline, and I had a loose piece of rebar I'd picked up from the rubble of the road. I jammed the rebar into the hasp of the lock and levered it against the door frame. I threw my weight against it, grunting with the effort. My ribs screamed in protest, definitely cracked, maybe broken. I ignored it. The wood of the frame splintered before the lock gave way, and the hasp tore free. I shoved the door open and stumbled inside. It was dry. That was the first victory. It smelled of diesel fuel and sawdust. I swept my light around. A workbench. A couple of shovels. A Maximize heater that was unplugged and useless. And there, hanging on a hook by the back wall, a coat. It was a heavy, high-visibility orange parka, stained with grease and road salt. To me, it looked like royal velvet. I stripped off my soaked work jacket and shirt, the cold air biting my skin, and pulled the parka on. It was oversized and smelled like stale tobacco, but it was dry and lined with quilted fleece. I zipped it to my chin and pulled the hood up. I could feel my body heat starting to get trapped, the shivering slowing down just a fraction. I sat on an overturned bucket to catch my breath. I needed a plan. I checked my watch. 2:05 a.m. The event had started less than an hour ago. I pulled out my phone. I knew the cell towers were likely down. They rely on power and line-of-sight alignment, both of which were compromised. But I checked anyway. No signal. Just the searching icon, spinning and spinning. I tried the radio again. My handheld was a ruggedized commercial unit. I switched to the emergency management channel. Static. I spun the dial. Channel 4, the police band. Static. Channel 9, fire and rescue. Sector 7 is gone. I repeat, the bridge is static. Liquefaction is static. Falling back to the ridge. A voice. Thin, distorted, cutting through the white noise for just a second. Hello. I keyed the mic. This is Operator Thorne at the Riverside Treatment Plant. I have a catastrophic failure of the facility. I am on County Road 9. Is anyone reading this? Silence. Just the hiss of the empty airwaves. The transmission was gone, but the words stuck in my head. Liquefaction. I knew what that meant. I'd studied it in geology courses for civil engineering. When water-saturated soil is shaken violently enough, it loses its stiffness and behaves like a liquid. Buildings sink. Roads flow like rivers. Cars are swallowed whole. If the ground was liquefying, the valley floor wasn't safe. The treatment plant, the county road, the suburbs down by the creek, they were all in the kill zone. I had to get to higher ground. My house was in the Heights, a neighborhood built on a granite shelf 5 miles west. My wife, Sarah, would be there. My daughter, Emily. Sarah was a light sleeper. She would have felt the quake. She would be terrified. I had to move. I stood up, grabbing a heavy iron pry bar from the workbench. It wasn't a weapon exactly, but it was a tool, and in a world where the laws of physics seemed to be breaking down, a tool was the only currency that mattered. I stepped back out into the night. The mist was clearing slightly, or maybe my eyes were adjusting. I looked up at the sky again. That's when I saw the second thing that told me this wasn't just an earthquake. The stars were moving. I braced myself against the doorframe of the shed and stared up. It wasn't the stars themselves, of course. It was the reference points. The silhouette of the tree line against the sky was shifting, slowly but perceptibly, sliding to the right. The earth wasn't just shaking, it was travelling. The crust was sliding over the mantel like a loose tablecloth. I felt a wave of vertigo so strong I almost threw up. The ground beneath my feet felt solid for the moment, but that was an illusion. I was standing on a raft, drifting in an ocean of magma. I forced my eyes back to the road. "Don't look up," I told myself. "Look at your boots. Look 10 feet in front of you. Solve the problem in front of your face." The problem was the bridge. To get to the heights, I had to cross Miller's Creek. The bridge was an old concrete span, built in the 50s. If the road was shattered, the bridge was likely worse. I started walking again, the pry bar heavy in my hand. The parka kept the wind out, but my legs were still wet and freezing. I found a rhythm. Step, test the ground, step, test the ground. About a mile down the road, I heard the sound of rushing water. Not the mechanical roar of the plant, but the organic, chaotic sound of a flash flood. Miller's Creek wasn't a creek anymore. I stopped at the edge of the washout. The bridge was gone. Not just collapsed, gone. The concrete abutments had been scoured away. In its place was a raging torrent of brown water, choked with uprooted trees, pieces of siding, and, was that a roof? I shone my light across the water. It was easily 100 yards wide now. On the far side, I saw headlights, a single pair of beams, pointing up into the sky at a crazy angle. A car had gone off the edge where the bridge used to be, getting hung up on a tangle of debris near the bank. I squinted. The headlights were flickering. The horn was blaring, a constant, stuck note that wavered as the battery died. Honk! It was a mournful, desperate sound. "Hey!" I shouted, cupping my hands. "Is anyone there?" My voice was swallowed instantly by the roar of the water. I watched the car. It was a sedan, maybe a Honda. As I watched, the debris pile shifting beneath it gave a groan. The car tilted further. The headlights dipped, submerging into the brown current. The horn gurgled and died. The red taillights bobbed once, twice, and then vanished under the surface. I stood there, helpless. I couldn't swim that. Michael Phelps couldn't swim that. I was cut off. The direct route to the heights was gone. I felt the panic rising in my chest, a hot, tightening sensation. I clamped down on it. Panic is a luxury. Panic is for people who have someone coming to save them. I pulled a mental map of the county up in my head. I'd driven these roads for a decade. I knew the layout of the pipes, the elevation gradients. If the bridge was out, I had to go upstream. There was a railroad trestle about 2 miles north. It was built of heavy steel lattice, anchored into the bedrock, designed to carry coal trains loaded to the brim. If anything survived the shake, it would be the trestle. 2 miles. In the dark. On broken ground. I turned north, leaving the road, heading into the woods that lined the creek. The woods were a nightmare. The ground here hadn't just cracked. It had rippled. Trees were leaning at impossible angles, their roots ripped out of the soil, standing like tangled spiderwebs in the beam of my light. I climbed over a fallen oak, the rough bark scraping my hands. I slid down into a gully that hadn't been there yesterday. Then came the smell. It hit me so hard my eyes watered. Rotten eggs. Garlic. Mercaptan. Natural gas. I froze. A high-pressure transmission line ran through this corridor. It must have ruptured. The smell was thick, cloying. The gas was heavier than air. It would be settling in the low spots, the gullies, the ditches, the exact places I was walking. I was walking through a bomb. One spark. One rock striking another rock and creating a flint spark. One static discharge from my nylon parka rubbing against itself. I slowly reached up and clicked off my flashlight. Darkness slammed back down. I couldn't risk the electronics. Even a waterproof tactical light has a switch, and switches can spark. I stood in the pitch black, breathing shallowly through my nose, trying to gauge the wind. The gas was invisible, but the smell told me everything. It was strong here. Very strong. I had to move up. Gas sinks. I needed elevation. I reached out blindly, feeling for a tree trunk. I found one, a pine, sticky with resin. I used it to guide myself, stepping carefully, moving uphill, away from the creek bed. I moved like a ghost. Slow. Deliberate. Every time my boot crunched on a dry twig, I flinched, waiting for the fireball. I climbed for what felt like 20 minutes, blind, guided only by the slope of the ground and the decreasing intensity of the sulfur smell. When the air finally tasted clean again, just cold damp earth, no garlic, I slumped against a tree trunk and dry heaved. My legs were shaking so bad I couldn't stand. I sat there in the dark, listening to the world grind itself to pieces. And then I heard it. Not the water. Not the earth. Footsteps. Crunch. 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 They were coming from the direction of the railroad tracks. Slow, heavy steps. I held my breath. I didn't turn my light back on. I gripped the iron pry bar in my right hand and pressed myself into the hollow of the tree roots. The footsteps got closer. They weren't rhythmic. It was a stumble, then a drag. Stumble, drag. A voice, muttering, low and feverish. Insurance isn't going to cover it. No way. Acts of God. Look at the fine print. A man wandered into the faint periphery of my vision, a darker shadow against the dark trees. He was holding a lighter. The small yellow flame flickered in his cupped hand. He was walking downhill, toward the gully, toward the gas. My throat went dry. If he went another 50 yards down into that pocket of macaptan with an open flame, he wouldn't just kill himself. He'd ignite a fuel-air explosion that would level the woods and take me with it. I had seconds to decide. Stay hidden and hope he burns alone, or reveal myself. I stood up, stepping out from behind the tree. Stop! I barked. My voice sounded harsh, unrecognizable. Put out the light. The figure froze. The lighter flame wavered. "Who's that?" he slurped. "You insurance? Put it out." I screamed, lunging forward. "There's gas. The line is." He didn't put it out. He dropped it. Time is a liar. They tell you that in an accident, time slows down. That's not true. Time stops. It waits for you to make a mistake. When that lighter left his hand, I didn't think about the physics of falling bodies or the ignition point of methane. I just saw the flame. A tiny yellow tear in the darkness, tumbling end over end toward the carpet of dead pine needles. I didn't run. I launched. I hit the ground hard, my chest slamming into the dirt, extending my arm like I was trying to slide into home plate. My gloved hand slapped down over the lighter just as it hit the earth. I felt the heat against my palm through the leather. I pressed down, grinding my hand into the soil, burying that flame, suffocating it. I held it there, face pressed into the dirt, waiting. 1 second. 2 seconds. I waited for the whoosh. I waited for the air around me to turn into fire. I waited to be vaporized. Nothing happened. Just the sound of my own heart hammering against the root system of the pine tree. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The gas concentration must have been just below the explosive limit right here on the slope. We were lucky. Unbelievably, stupidly lucky. I rolled over and sat up, grabbing the stranger by the lapels of his jacket. "You idiot!" I hissed, shaking him. "You trying to kill us?" He didn't fight back. He just wobbled, his head lolling on his neck. Up close, in the faint grey light, he looked like a accountant who'd had the worst day of his life. He was wearing a pajama top tucked into dress slacks and one slipper. The other foot was bare and bleeding. "The claim," he mumbled, his eyes wide and unseeing. The adjuster said, "Flood damage isn't." He was in shock. Deep shock. His brain had snapped under the weight of whatever he had just seen. "Hey," I said, softer this time. I slapped his cheek lightly. "Look at me. What's your name?" He blinked. "Gary." I was watching TV. "Okay, Gary. I'm Elias. We have to move. The air here is poison. Do you understand? We have to go up." I hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight, but he moved when I pulled. I kept a grip on his arm, steering him uphill, away from the gully, away from the invisible pool of gas. We climbed for another 10 minutes until the terrain leveled out. The trees thinned, replaced by the coarse gravel of a railroad embankment. We had made it to the tracks. I scrambled up the steep slope of loose stone, dragging Gary behind me. When I crested the top, I stopped. The rail line was the main commercial artery for the region. 2 sets of heavy-gauge steel tracks running north-south. They were destroyed. The steel rails weren't just bent, they were twisted like licorice. In one spot, the left rail had snapped and curled upward into a perfect steel loop, 10 feet high, silhouetted against the clouds. The wooden ties were splintered, jutting out of the ballast like broken teeth. But the trestle was still there. It loomed out of the dark about 50 yards ahead. A massive black skeleton spanning the gap where the creek, now a river, raged below. "Come on," I said. We walked down the center of the ruined track bed. The wind was stronger up here, exposed. It whipped my parka and stung my eyes. We reached the start of the bridge. It was an open-deck trestle, no solid floor, just the ties and the rails sitting on top of the steel girders. You could look straight down between the ties and see the water churning 80 feet below. I shone my light out across the span. The bridge had taken a hit. The far end had shifted. The entire structure was torqued, leaning slightly to the west. It looked like a spine with scoliosis, but the main trusses seemed intact. "We have to cross that?" Gary whispered. It was the first lucid thing he'd said. "Unless you want to swim," I said. "Stay in the center. Step on the ties, not the gaps. Don't look down." I took the lead. I stepped onto the first tie. It was slick with creosote and rain. The bridge groaned under my weight, a low, metallic complaint that vibrated up through my boots. "Gruen." "It's okay," I lied. "It's settling. Move." We started across. It was a nightmare of rhythm. Step. Balance. Step. Balance. The wind pushed at us, trying to knock us sideways. Below, the water roared, a constant, hungry sound. Halfway across, the vibration started again. Not the bridge settling, the earth moving. It started as a buzz in the steel rails. Then the whole structure began to shake. I dropped to a crouch, grabbing the cold steel rail. "Get down!" I yelled at Gary. He didn't get down. He froze. He stood there, swaying, staring at the water below. "Gary, get down!" The shaking intensified. The bridge wasn't just vibrating now. It was swaying. I could hear the rivets screaming as the steel plates ground against each other. Gary looked at me. His face was a pale mask of terror. "I can't," he whimpered. Then, the track he was standing on buckled. A section of the rail 10 feet in front of us popped its spikes with a sound like a gunshot. The steel bar whipped upward. The vibration knocked Gary off balance. He tipped sideways. He didn't scream. He just flailed his arms, looking for something to grab. His hand brushed the railing, missed, and he went over the side. I lunged, sprawling flat on the ties, reaching out into the dark. My fingers brushed fabric, the back of his pajama shirt. I clamped down, my grip tightening on the thin cotton. He slammed into the side of the steel girder below the deck, dangling 80 feet over the black water. The jolt nearly pulled me off the bridge. I slammed my chest into the railroad tie, hooking my legs around the rail behind me. "Hold on!" I screamed. "I got you!" I had him, but barely. He was heavy, dead weight swinging in the wind. The fabric of his shirt was tearing. "Rip! Gary! Reach up! Grab the girder!" He looked up at me. His glasses were gone. His eyes were wide, empty circles. He wasn't trying to climb. He was just hanging there, letting gravity win. "I didn't turn off the stove," he said. His voice was calm, conversational. "I left the pot roast on. Gary, grab the damn steel." The shirt tore. It wasn't a slow tear. It was instant. The cotton gave way. I felt the weight vanish from my hand. I watched him fall. He dropped silently, a pale shape disappearing into the abyss. There was no splash. The roar of the water swallowed him before he even hit it. I lay there on the trembling bridge, staring down into the dark, my hand still clutching a scrap of blue flannel. The shaking stopped. The earth settled again, as if satisfied with the sacrifice. I didn't move for a long time. I couldn't. I just lay face down on the creosote-soaked wood, shivering, listening to the wind howl through the steel lattice. I had saved him from the fire, only to feed him to the water. I stuffed the piece of fabric into my pocket. I don't know why. Witness, maybe. I forced myself up. I crawled the rest of the way. I didn't trust my legs anymore. I crawled on hands and knees over the wet ties until my palms hit gravel. Solid ground. The north bank. I rolled onto my back in the weeds, staring up at the sky. And then the sun began to rise. It wasn't a normal sunrise. The light that spilled over the eastern horizon was a bruised purple, bleeding into a sick, hazy orange. Dust. The atmosphere was choked with dust from a million landslides. As the light grew, I stood up to look at the world. I dropped to my knees. I was on a high embankment, looking out over the valley where the city suburbs used to be. They weren't there. The landscape looked like a broken puzzle. The earth had fractured into massive plates. Some sections had sunk 50 feet, turning neighborhoods into lakes. Others had been thrust upward, exposing jagged walls of red clay and severed plumbing. To my left, a housing development, rows of neat beige split levels, was gone. In its place was a massive slide of mud and debris that had flowed down the hillside like slow lava. To my right, the highway overpass was a twisted ribbon of concrete, collapsed onto the roadway below. Cars were scattered like toys thrown by a tantruming child. But the worst part was the geometry. It was all wrong. Straight lines were curved. Flat planes were tilted. The horizon itself was jagged. I looked west, toward the heights, toward Sarah and Emily. The granite shelf the heights sat on was still there. I could see the silhouette of the ridge, but there was a thick plume of black smoke rising from it, a dark, oily pillar connecting the ground to the clouds. "I'm coming," I whispered. It sounded pathetic against the scale of the destruction. I checked my gear. Flashlight off. Pry bar. Water treatment plant ID. A scrap of blue flannel. I turned away from the river and started walking along the tracks. The rails were the only path left. They were broken, twisted, and dangerous, but they headed west. I walked for an hour as the light strengthened. I saw things I can't unsee. A deer impaled on a fence post, still breathing. A family sitting on the roof of their sunken house, wrapped in blankets, not waving, just watching me pass. Around 7 a.m., I saw the obstruction. Up ahead, a train had derailed. It was a long coal hauler. The engines had jumped the track where the ground shifted, ploughing into the embankment. The coal cars behind them had accordioned, piling up in a jagged mountain of black steel and black dust. I climbed up the side of the embankment to skirt around the wreck. As I came around the nose of the lead locomotive, a massive GE diesel unit lying on its side, hissing steam, I saw him. He wasn't a survivor. He was working. A man in a military-style vest and a helmet was crouching by the open fuel tank of the locomotive. He had a siphon hose and a jerry can. He was stealing diesel. He looked up as I stepped on the gravel. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. He stood up. He was holding a carbine, not a hunting rifle, an AR-15, matte black, with optics. He raised the rifle, aiming it center mass at my chest. "Walk away," he said. His voice was flat. Professional. I froze, raising my hands slowly. The pry bar was heavy in my right hand, hanging by my side. "I'm just passing through," I said. "Heading to the heights." "Nobody's passing through," he said. "This is a salvage zone. Turn around. Go back to the river." "The bridge is out," I said. "I can't go back." He clicked the safety off. Click. "Not my problem," he said. "The resource wars started at midnight, pal. You're trespassing." I looked at his finger on the trigger. I looked at the fuel cans. And I looked at the ground behind him. A fissure was opening. Silently. The gravel was trickling down into a crack that was widening right between his boots. He couldn't feel it yet because of the thick soles of his combat boots, and the engine was still hissing, masking the sound. "Look," I said, pointing. "I'm not falling for the look-behind-you trick," he sneered. "Last warning." The crack widened to 6 inches. Then a foot. "I'm serious," I yelled. "Move." He adjusted his aim, squinting through the sight. He was going to kill me. He was going to put a 5.56 round through my heart because he wanted $50 worth of diesel fuel. I tightened my grip on the pry bar. I was 30 feet away. Too far to rush him. I had to make a choice. Run and get shot in the back. Or stand my ground and watch the earth swallow another human being. Gravity is patient. That's something you learn working with water pressure. You can build walls, you can install pumps, you can fight it for 50 years. But gravity always wins in the end. It just waits for the structure to fail. The man with the rifle didn't feel the failure until it was too late. He was staring at me down the barrel of that AR-15, his finger taking up the slack on the trigger. He was so focused on the threat in front of him, me, that he ignored the threat beneath him. The fissure didn't snap open. It sighed. The gravel embankment he was standing on just surrendered. It was a slope failure. The soil under his boots turned into a fluid slide of rock and coal dust. He didn't scream at first. His eyes just went wide. He fired the weapon. A reflex. Crack. The bullet missed me by inches. I felt the wind of it snap past my ear like an angry hornet. It struck the steel side of the locomotive behind me with a spark that looked like a camera flash. Then he was gone. He dropped waist deep into the widening crack. The earth crunched around his hips. He flailed, dropping the rifle to grab at the jagged edge of the asphalt, but the asphalt broke off in his hands. Help! The word tore out of him, high and desperate. The professional soldier facade vanished instantly. He was just a terrified guy trapped in a vice. I stood there. My heart was hammering so hard I could see my vision pulsing at the edges. The fissure groaned again. It pinched shut. It wasn't a fast slam. It was a slow, geological grinding. I heard the sound of his pelvis breaking. It sounded like dry branches snapping in a fire. He screamed then, a sound I will never, ever scrub out of my brain. It was a ragged animal noise that went on for 5 seconds, and then cut off abruptly as the earth squeezed the air out of his lungs. I didn't run to help him. I couldn't. The ground around the crack was still trembling, unstable. If I went closer, I'd go in with him. I watched him sink. The slide continued, pulling him down into the dark slurry of mud and coal. His hands clawed at the air. Then the gravel covered his chest, his neck, his face. Silence returned to the track bed. Just the hiss of the steam from the wrecked engine. I was alone again. I looked at the ground near where he had stood. The rifle was lying on a patch of stable turf, half buried in dust. I walked over. My legs felt like wood. I reached down and picked it up. It was heavy. Cold. I'd never held an assault rifle before. I checked the side. The safety lever was set to fire. I fumbled with it, my thumb slipping on the metal, until I clicked it to safe. I didn't want it. It felt like bad luck. It felt like murder. But the world had changed. The rules of the old world, where police came when you called and neighbors helped neighbors, were gone. Now, resources were life, and weapons were authority. I slung the strap over my shoulder. It banged against my ribs, bruising the already tender bone. I scanned the area. The jerry cans of diesel were gone, swallowed by the fissure. But his pack was there. I opened it. 2 bottles of water, a protein bar, a folded map of the county, and a handheld CB radio. I took it all. I drank the first bottle of water in one long pull, the plastic crinkling in the silence. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but it was the best thing I'd ever had. I checked the radio. It was dead. Batteries drained. I shoved it into my pocket anyway. I turned west. The heights were still 3 miles away. The walk along the tracks became a trudge through hell. The sun was fully up now, but it gave no warmth. The light was filtered through the haze of dust and smoke, turning the world a sickly sepia tone. It looked like an old, faded photograph. About a mile past the train wreck, the tracks intersected with the interstate, or what used to be the interstate. I climbed the embankment to get a look at the highway. I stopped. I had expected damage. I had expected cracks. I hadn't expected the parking lot. The interstate was a river of steel. Thousands of cars. They were bumper to bumper, door to door, stretching as far as I could see in both directions. When the quake hit, everyone had the same idea: run. They flooded the highway. And then, the highway stopped moving. The overpass ahead had collapsed, sealing the exit. The cars in the back had kept coming, boxing everyone in. It was a graveyard of vehicles. I slid down the embankment and walked onto the asphalt. It was eerie. Most of the cars were empty now. Doors stood open, flapping slightly in the wind. Suitcases were spilled open on the pavement. Clothes, toys, electronics scattered and trampled. People had abandoned their vehicles to flee on foot when the road died. But not everyone. I walked past a silver SUV. The windows were fogged up. Inside, I saw a shape slumped over the steering wheel. An elderly man. He wasn't moving. The car wasn't running. He had just waited. He had waited for the traffic to clear until the cold took him. I kept moving, weaving between the bumpers. I kept the rifle pulled tight against my chest, hidden under the folds of my oversized parka. I didn't want to look like a threat. I wanted to look like a shadow. "Hey, you!" The voice came from a camper van jammed against the median barrier. I froze. A woman leaned out of the broken side window. She looked ragged, her hair matted. She held a tire iron in her hand. "You got water?" she rasped. I felt the heavy weight of the second water bottle in my pocket. "No," I lied. My voice was flat. "I'm dry." She stared at me. She looked at the shape of the rifle under my coat. She saw the lie in my eyes. "Liar," she spat. "My baby is thirsty." I looked at the van. I couldn't hear a baby. I couldn't hear anything from inside. Maybe there was a baby. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe she was just delirious. In the old world, I would have stopped. I would have given her the water. I would have tried to fix the tire. In this world, I tightened my grip on the strap of the rifle and kept walking. "I hope you choke on it," she screamed after me. "I hope you die screaming." I didn't look back. I just walked faster, stepping over broken glass and discarded fast food wrappers. The guilt felt heavier than the gun. It sat in my stomach, cold and hard. This is what it takes, I told myself. Survival is a series of subtractions. You subtract your empathy. You subtract your morals. Until all that's left is the math of staying alive. I cleared the traffic jam an hour later. The highway merged into the access road for the heights. The terrain changed here. The heights sat on a granite uplift, a geological shelf that was older and harder than the valley floor. The good news: the granite hadn't liquefied. The houses up there weren't sinking. The bad news: the shelf had risen. I stood at the base of the access road. The pavement ended abruptly. In front of me was a sheer wall of exposed rock, 20 feet high. The earthquake had thrust the entire plateau upward. The road was severed, the connection to the valley broken. I looked up. I could see the edge of the subdivision above me. The guardrail hung out over open air, twisting like a metal vine, and I saw the source of the smoke. It wasn't a house fire. A yellow house, right on the edge of the new cliff, had been sheared in half. The front rooms were gone, fallen into the rubble below. The back half, kitchen, bedrooms, was still standing, open to the air like a dollhouse. From the exposed basement, a jet of fire was roaring horizontally out into the sky. The gas line had sheared, and something had ignited it. It sounded like a jet engine. The flame was blue at the base, orange at the tip, 20 feet long. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. I needed to get up there. My house was 3 streets back from that edge. I scanned the cliff face. The rock was raw, jagged granite. It was climbable, but not easily. Not with broken ribs. Not with a rifle. But I didn't have a choice. I couldn't go back to the river. I couldn't go back to the highway. I slung the rifle across my back, tightening the strap until it dug into my spine. I took a breath, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my side. I reached up and found a handhold, a sharp spur of rock. I pulled. My body screamed. My ribs felt like they were grinding together. I gritted my teeth and found a foothold. I climbed. Slowly, painfully. Halfway up, the aftershock hit. It wasn't the rolling motion of the liquefaction this time. Granite doesn't roll. It vibrates. The rock face buzzed against my chest. It felt like holding a power sander. Dust rained down into my eyes. Hold on. Just hold on. I jammed my fingers into a crack, feeling the stone bite into my skin. I pressed my face against the cold rock and waited. Above me, something shifted. A loose boulder, dislodged by the vibration, tumbled over the edge. I heard it coming, a clatter-clatter whoosh. I ducked my head, hunching my shoulders. The rock, the size of a microwave, smashed into the cliff face 2 feet to my left. Fragments of stone exploded outward. A shard sliced across my cheek, hot and sharp. Then the shaking stopped. I hung there, gasping, blood dripping from my cheek onto my sleeve. "Sarah," I whispered, "I'm coming." I forced my limbs to move. 1 hand, 1 foot. I crested the lip of the cliff 5 minutes later. I rolled over the edge, collapsing onto the manicured grass of a front lawn. I lay there for a minute, staring at a pink plastic flamingo that had fallen over in the flower bed. It seemed so ridiculous. A plastic bird in the apocalypse. I pushed myself up. I was in the heights. The street was unrecognizable. The asphalt was cracked, but the houses were mostly standing. Shingles were stripped off, chimneys had collapsed, and windows were shattered, but they were standing. But it was quiet. Too quiet. No people running. No shouting. Just the roar of the gas fire from the yellow house at the end of the block. I started to run. My house was on Elm Street, 2 blocks over. I rounded the corner. My heart stopped. Elm Street was there. My house was there. It was a white colonial with black shutters. The roof was sagging, and the front porch had collapsed, but it was there. But the front door was wide open, and parked in my driveway was a truck. Not my truck. It was a dark green pickup, lifted, with a brush guard on the front. It was covered in mud. The engine was idling, and sitting in the bed of the truck, tied with zip ties, shivering in the cold, was my dog, Buster, my golden retriever. He saw me. He barked, a sharp, frantic sound. I dropped to a knee behind a neighbor's hedge. I unslung the rifle. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold this time. Someone was in my house. Someone had my dog. And if they had my dog, I clicked the safety off. I didn't care about the morality anymore. I didn't care about the physics of the earth. I took a breath. I steadied the barrel on the hedge. I watched the front door of my home, waiting for whoever was inside to step out. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before violence. It's not the absence of sound. It's the absence of life. The birds stop singing. The wind seems to hold its breath. Even the inanimate objects, the mailboxes, the shattered windows, the plastic flamingo, seem to freeze, waiting to see who is going to die. I was kneeling in the wet mulch behind the Petersons' hedge, 50 feet from my own front door. My heart wasn't beating. It was vibrating, a frantic, fluttery sensation against my bruised ribs. I stared at the green truck. It was a Ford, maybe 5 years old, lifted high on mud tires. The engine was idling with a deep, throaty rumble that shook the exhaust pipe. It was the only sound in the world. Buster was in the bed. My golden retriever. He was 7 years old, grey around the muzzle, with a hip dysplasia that made him waddle when he walked. He wasn't a guard dog. He was a rug that breathed, and someone had zip-tied his snout shut. I could see the white plastic tie digging into his fur. His eyes were rolling back in panic, wide and wet. He was thrashing against a lead tied to the roll bar, making the truck's suspension squeak. Squeak, squeak. That sound broke me. It bypassed the logical part of my brain, the engineer who understands load limits and flow rates, and went straight to the lizard brain, the part that bites. I shifted the AR-15. The metal was freezing against my cheek. The optics were battery-powered, a red dot sight. I looked through the glass. A small, glowing red circle hovered in the air. It looked fake. It looked like a video game. I swept the dart from the truck to the open front door of my house. Where are they? The question was a scream in my head. Sarah, Emily, were they in the truck? Were they in the house? Were they? I couldn't finish the thought. Movement. A shadow fell across the threshold. A man stepped out onto my porch. He wasn't a soldier. He was big, wearing a heavy Carhartt jacket and a camouflage baseball cap. He was carrying a plastic tote bin, my plastic tote bin, the grey one from the garage, labelled camping gear. He walked casually, like he was moving into a new apartment. He stepped over a broken piece of gutter and headed for the truck. "Heavy," he grunted. A second voice answered from inside the house. "Just grab the generator. Leave the clothes." My generator. The Honda 2000 I'd bought after the ice storm 3 years ago. The second man stepped out. He was younger, wiry, wearing a black hoodie and holding a crowbar. He had my generator in one hand and my stomach dropped. In his other hand, he was holding Emily's backpack, the pink one with the unicorn patch. It looked full. They weren't just looting supplies. They were taking my daughter's survival kit. I stood up. I didn't plan to. My legs just did it. I stepped out from behind the hedge, walking onto the sidewalk. I felt completely detached, like I was watching myself from a drone overhead. "Put it down," I said. My voice was surprisingly loud. It didn't crack. It sounded like the sound of gravel being poured down a chute. The two men froze. The big guy with the tote bin turned slowly. He looked at me. He looked at the rifle. He looked at my face, covered in mud and dried blood from the cliff. He didn't drop the bin. He smiled. It was a nervous, twitchy smile. "Easy, pal," he said. "We're just salvaging. House was open. Nobody home." "Put it down," I repeated, "and tell me where the family is." The younger guy in the hoodie shifted his weight. He dropped the generator. It hit the concrete porch with a heavy clunk. His hand tightened on the crowbar. "They're gone, man," the young guy said. His eyes were darting around, looking for his own exit, or maybe a weapon. Place was empty when we got here. Swear to God. "The dog," I said, raising the barrel slightly so the red dot settled on the big guy's chest. "You tied up the dog." "He was barking," the big guy said, "attracting attention. We were doing him a favor. Untie him." The big guy hesitated. "Look, buddy, you don't want to do this. There's plenty of stuff for everyone. We can split the untie the dog." The big guy's smile vanished. He realized I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't a fellow survivor looking for a trade. I was a homeowner looking for an execution. He set the tote bin down on the driveway. He raised his hands slowly. "Okay, okay, I'm moving." He started to back up toward the truck bed. But the young kid, he was the problem. He was vibrating with adrenaline. I could see it in his neck muscles. He made a choice. A bad one. "Gun!" the kid screamed. "He didn't attack me." He reached behind his back, into his waistband. I didn't think. I squeezed. The rifle didn't feel like a tool anymore. It felt like an explosion in my hands. Crack, crack. 2 shots. The recoil slammed the stock into my broken ribs. A white-hot lance of pain shot through my chest, blinding me for a microsecond. When my vision cleared, the young kid was down. He was on his back on the porch, clutching his thigh. He was screaming, a high, thin sound like a tea kettle. The crowbar clattered down the steps. The big guy didn't fight. He didn't pull a weapon. He scrambled. He dove behind the green truck, putting the engine block between us. "Don't shoot," he yelled. "I'm unarmed. Don't shoot." I kept the rifle trained on the truck. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. The adrenaline dump was hitting me. I felt nauseous. I had just shot a man. I was a water treatment operator. I fixed pumps. I didn't shoot kids in hoodies. "Get him out of here," I yelled. My voice was ragged. "Get him and get gone. If I see this truck again, I aim for the driver's seat." "Okay, okay." The big guy crawled out, keeping low. He grabbed the kid by the back of his hoodie. The kid was sobbing, his leg a mess of blood and denim. He dragged him across the lawn, threw him into the passenger seat of the truck, and then scrambled into the driver's side. The engine roared. He threw it into reverse, tires spinning on the pavement, burning rubber. The truck fishtailed backward out of the driveway, clipped the mailbox, and sped off down the street. Silence rushed back in. Just me. The sobbing of the kid fading in the distance, and the squeak of the truck springs from Buster thrashing in the bed. Wait. They left the dog. In their panic, they hadn't untied him. But the tailgate was down. As the truck sped away, Buster slid backward. He hit the open tailgate, scrambled with his paws, and tumbled out. He hit the asphalt with a yelp, rolled, and came to a stop in the middle of the road. I dropped the rifle. I let it fall into the grass. "Buster!" I ran to him. He was shaking, lying on his side. I pulled the knife from my pocket, the small folding utility knife I used for cutting filter gaskets, and sliced the zip tie off his muzzle, then the rope around his neck. He didn't run. He licked my hand. One long, slobbery lick across my bloodied knuckles. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, burying my face in his dirty fur. "I'm here." I checked him for injuries. He was bruised, terrified, but unbroken. I stood up. The pain in my ribs was a dull, throbbing roar now, but I pushed it down. The house. I picked up the rifle again. I hated the weight of it now, and walked up the driveway. I stepped over the bloodstains on the porch. I walked through the open front door. Sarah! My voice echoed in the hallway. The house was cold. The furnace was off, obviously. But it was the stillness that terrified me. It was a wreck. The earthquake had shaken everything off the walls. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor. The bookshelf in the living room had toppled, spilling novels and encyclopedias across the carpet. But it wasn't just the quake. The drawers were pulled out. The couch cushions were slashed. Someone had been looking for something. The looters? Or someone else? I moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator was face down on the floor. The pantry door was ripped off its hinges. Emily! I checked the dining room. The table was split in half, crushed by the chandelier that had fallen from the ceiling. I moved to the stairs. The drywall was cracked, revealing the studs underneath, but the stairs seemed solid. I climbed. The hallway upstairs was lined with family photos. First day of school. Disney World. The Christmas card from last year. The glass on the Disney photo was cracked right over Sarah's face. I pushed open the door to Emily's room. It was empty. The bed was unmade. Her favorite stuffed bear, a ragged thing named Mr. Biscuits, was gone. That was a good sign. If they had left in a panic, Mr. Biscuits would be on the floor. If Mr. Biscuits was gone, it meant Emily had packed him. It meant there was a plan. I went to the master bedroom. This was the room I was afraid of. If something bad had happened, it would be here. I pushed the door open. The bed was shoved against the wall. The dresser was overturned. But there were no bodies. There was no blood. I walked to the closet. Sarah was organized. She was a logistics manager for a shipping company. She didn't panic, she planned. We had talked about this. If the grid goes down, if there's a fire, if we get separated. The go bags. I looked at the top shelf of the closet. The 2 red duffel bags were gone. They had left. They had evacuated. Relief washed over me so hard I almost collapsed. They weren't in the rubble. They weren't in the house. They had made it out. But where? The cell towers were down. The roads were cut. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, my head in my hands. Think. Elias. Think like Sarah. If the roads are blocked, where do you go? The high school. It was the designated FEMA shelter. But it was in the valley. Sarah knew the liquefaction risks. She wouldn't go to low ground. The fire station? Maybe. I looked around the room. I needed a clue. Then I saw it. On the nightstand, next to the overturned lamp. A book. It was a copy of Goodnight Moon, Emily's book from when she was a baby. She hadn't read it in years. It had been on the bookshelf downstairs. Why was it on the nightstand? I picked it up. It opened naturally to a specific page. Not the end. The middle. There was something tucked inside. A photograph. An old Polaroid from when we were dating, 10 years ago. It was a picture of us standing in front of a cabin. A small, A-frame cabin deep in the Blackwood Ridge, 30 miles north. My grandfather's old hunting shack. I turned the photo over. Written in Sarah's neat, cursive handwriting, in blue ink. The valley is sinking. We are going up. If you find this, don't stay. The gas lines are going to blow. We love you. P.S. I took the Glock. I laughed. A dry, rasping sound that turned into a cough. She took the pistol. Good girl. I looked at the timestamp on the note. Tuesday, 1:45 a.m. She had left 20 minutes after the quake started. She was fast. But then the reality hit me. Blackwood Ridge. 30 miles north. To get there, she would have to cross the city limits. She would have to navigate the fractured highway system. And she was doing it alone, with a 9-year-old, in a station wagon, while the world was tearing itself apart. And that was 3 days ago. I stood up. I shoved the photo into my pocket, right next to the scrap of Gary's pajama shirt. I had a destination. I walked back downstairs. Buster was waiting in the foyer, chewing nervously on his paw. "Come on, boy," I said. "We're not staying." I went to the kitchen. I needed supplies. The looters had taken the generator and the obvious stuff, but they missed the hidden things. I opened the vent cover under the refrigerator. I reached in and pulled out a heavy canvas sack. My stash. 4 boxes of 5.56 ammunition. A water filter. A first aid trauma kit. I loaded everything into a backpack I found in the mudroom. I grabbed a jar of peanut butter and a box of crackers that had fallen behind the stove. I walked out the front door. The sun was high now, burning through the haze. The smoke from the gas fire down the street was getting thicker, blacker. Sarah was right. The gas lines were a ticking bomb. The Heights wasn't safe. The granite shelf might be stable, but the infrastructure on top of it was going to turn this neighborhood into an incinerator. I looked at the truck the looters had fled in. I looked at the driveway. My neighbor's garage door, Bob, the guy across the street, was open. His vintage Jeep Wrangler was sitting there. Bob was in Florida for the winter. I didn't hesitate. I walked across the street. I used the butt of the rifle to smash the driver's side window. I reached in and popped the hood. Hotwiring a 1995 Jeep is easy if you know how the ignition coil works. It took me 2 minutes. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. It sounded like freedom. I whistled. "Buster! Load up!" The dog scrambled into the passenger seat, panting, happy to be in a car, happy to be moving. I threw my gear in the back. I propped the rifle against the passenger door, within easy reach. I shifted into gear. The road north was broken. The bridges were down. The people were desperate. But I knew where I was going. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the empty shell of my life behind. I didn't look back at the house. It was just wood and drywall now. My home was in a station wagon somewhere on the road to Blackwood Ridge. I turned the Jeep north, toward the mountains. "Hang on, Sarah," I whispered, pressing the accelerator. "I'm coming." Driving through the end of the world sounds like a bad country song. It's just you, a dog, and a stolen truck, trying to outrun the devil. But the reality isn't romantic. It's a geometry problem. The Jeep Wrangler was a 1995 YJ model. Leaf springs, square headlights, and a suspension that felt every single pebble on the road. It didn't have air conditioning, and the heater smelled like burning hair. But it had a mechanical transfer case and solid axles. In a world where the microchips had fried and the GPS satellites were screaming into the void, this hunk of primitive iron was the most advanced technology on the planet. I steered with my left hand, keeping my right on the shifter. Buster was sitting up in the passenger seat, nose pressed against the cracked glass, watching the ruins of suburbia blur past. The Heights were behind us now. I had managed to navigate the access roads down the back side of the granite shelf. It was a steep, winding descent through what used to be a nature preserve. Now, it was a landslide zone. I had to put the jeep in 4 low to crawl over a section where the road had simply slid 50 feet down the ravine. The tires clawed at the mud, the engine roaring, tossing us around like dice in a cup. But we made it. Now, we were in the transition zone. The commercial strip. You know these places. Every American city has one. A 4-lane strode lined with fast food joints, mattress stores, and strip malls. It was unrecognizable. The liquefaction that had swallowed the valley floor had rippled out here, too. The pavement was buckled into waves, like a frozen black ocean. I had to weave the jeep between the crests, driving on the sidewalks, then the median, then through the shattered front window of a car dealership. I passed a shopping mall. The Grandview Center. The entire south wall of the Anchor department store had collapsed. You could see into the building like a cutaway diagram. Rows of mannequins stood in the wreckage, still wearing this season's fashion, their plastic limbs twisted at unnatural angles. They looked more like the dead than the actual dead did. The parking lot was a war zone. Looting had started early here. Cars were smashed, burned out. A flatbed truck had rammed through the security gates of an electronics store and was now sitting abandoned, surrounded by empty boxes of 4K TVs. Who takes a TV during an earthquake? I thought. What are you going to plug it into? It's the denial. People grab the things they value in the old world because they can't process that the value system has crashed. They think if they have the TV, things will go back to normal. I kept moving. Second gear. 15 miles per hour. Keep the RPMs up. Don't stop. Then I saw the hospital. St. Mary's. It was the regional trauma center. A massive, 10-story brick structure on a hill overlooking the strip. I slowed the jeep to a crawl. The hill had failed. The slope stability must have been compromised by the shear waves. The entire foundation of the north wing had sheared off. 3 stories of the hospital had slid down the hill and crashed into the parking garage below. It was a tangle of concrete, rebar, and crushed ambulances. Smoke was pouring out of the upper floors that were still standing. I could see figures in the broken windows. Tiny, waving shapes. Sheets hung out with messages painted in red, but they were too far away to read. I felt a punch in my gut. Sarah worked in logistics, but she volunteered at the pediatric wing on Tuesdays. Tuesday. The quake hit Tuesday morning. Or Tuesday night. Time was blurring. No. She left. I touched the pocket of my parka, feeling the crinkle of the Polaroid. She left at 1:45 a.m. She wasn't at the hospital. I repeated it like a mantra. She wasn't there. She wasn't there. I forced my eyes back to the road. I couldn't help the people in the windows. I couldn't move 1,000 tons of concrete with a pry bar. If I stopped, I died. And if I died, Sarah and Emily were alone. Sorry, I whispered to the smoking building. I'm so sorry. I accelerated. The jeep bucked over a curb, the suspension slamming into my bruised ribs. I gritted my teeth and drove. 3 miles north. The commercial strip ended, turning into the older, industrial outskirts. This was the bottleneck. To get to the highway that led to Blackwood Ridge, I had to cross the railroad tracks, the same line I had walked earlier, but 5 miles further west. There was an underpass, a concrete tunnel beneath the tracks. As I approached, I saw the brake lights. A line of cars, maybe 20 of them, stopped dead. I pulled the jeep onto the shoulder, stopping 100 yards back. I killed the engine to save fuel and to listen. Silence. No honking. No shouting. That was bad. Honking means frustration. Silence means fear. I grabbed the rifle from the back seat. "Stay," I told Buster. He whined, sensing my tension, but curled up in the seat. I opened the door and stepped out, keeping the jeep between me and the line of cars. I raised the optics to my eye. The underpass was flooded. The drainage pumps had failed when the power died. The dip in the road was filled with black, oily water. It looked deep. A sedan at the front of the line had tried to rush it. It was floating in the middle, water up to the windows. But that wasn't why the cars were stopped. On the other side of the flooded tunnel, on the dry pavement, there was a blockade. Jersey barriers, those heavy concrete dividers, had been dragged across the road. Behind them were men, armed men. I adjusted the focus on the scope. They weren't military. They weren't police. They looked like construction workers. High-vis vests, hard hats, but carrying hunting rifles and shotguns. They were stopping traffic coming out of the city. One of the drivers from the line of cars was walking toward the water's edge, shouting across the gap. "We have children," the driver yelled. "Let us through." A man behind the barricade picked up a megaphone. "Turn around," the amplified voice crackled. "Sector North is closed. Quarantine protocols are in effect. Turn around or we will fire." Quarantine? I lowered the rifle. There was no quarantine. The government hadn't had time to declare a national holiday, let alone a quarantine. This was local. This was a neighborhood or a town deciding they didn't want the refugee wave from the city washing over them. They were pulling up the drawbridge. I couldn't go through the tunnel. Even if I could float the jeep, they'd shoot me the second I hit the other side. I needed a detour. I looked at the map in my head. The railroad tracks were on a raised embankment. If the underpass was blocked, I had to go over the tracks. But the embankment was steep. 40 degrees of loose gravel and scrub brush. I looked at the jeep. It had mud tires. It had 4 low. It had a short wheelbase. It was a terrible idea. I climbed back into the driver's seat. Buster sat up, ears perked. "Hold on, buddy," I said. "This is gonna suck." I fired the engine. I shifted the transfer case into 4 low. The gears crunched, then engaged with a solid thunk. I didn't rejoin the line of cars. I wrenched the wheel hard to the right, driving off the shoulder, down into the drainage ditch, and up the other side. The jeep tilted violently. Mud sprayed from the tires. I gunned it, keeping the momentum. We hit the base of the railroad embankment. It looked like a wall of grey stone. "Momentum," I muttered. "Momentum is your friend." I floored it. The jeep roared. We hit the slope. The front tires bit into the loose gravel, slipping, spinning, then grabbing. The nose pointed straight at the sky. All I could see through the windshield was grey clouds. We were climbing. The engine screamed, the tachometer redlining. Rocks pinged off the undercarriage like gunfire. Halfway up, the rear tires lost traction. The jeep slewed sideways, sliding toward a drop-off. I steered into the slide, feathering the gas. "Don't brake. Do not brake." The tires caught a patch of weeds. The jeep shuddered, straightened out, and lunged upward. We crested the top of the embankment. The tracks were right there. I slammed on the brakes. The jeep skidded to a halt, the front bumper hanging over the far side of the rail bed. I looked down. Below me, on the other side of the tracks, was the blockade. The men behind the Jersey barriers were looking up. They hadn't expected a vehicle to come from the sky. One of them raised a shotgun. I didn't wait. I threw the jeep into gear and drove over the railroad tracks. It was brutal. The suspension bottomed out as we slammed over the steel rails. Bang bang. My head hit the roll bar. Buster yelped. I drove down the opposite side of the embankment. It was steeper here. It wasn't a drive. It was a controlled fall. I rode the brakes, sliding down the gravel in a cloud of dust. The jeep hit the bottom, a grassy field behind the blockade, with a bone-jarring impact that knocked the wind out of me. I didn't stop to check for damage. I punched the gas. We tore across the field, bypassing the barricade and the flooded tunnel entirely. I saw the men at the barrier running toward the field, shouting, raising weapons. Pow! A shotgun blast. I heard the pellets pepper the back of the jeep, a sound like throwing a handful of rice at a metal bucket. The rear window shattered. Safety glass rained down on the back seat. Head down. I yelled at the dog, grabbing his collar and pulling him low. We hit the asphalt of the road a quarter-mile north of the blockade. I shifted back into too high and floored it. The old six-cylinder engine howled, pushing the brick-shaped vehicle up to 60. I watched the rear-view mirror. No pursuit. They were dug in. They weren't chasing. They were guarding. We were out. We were north of the city. I drove for another hour without seeing a soul. The density dropped off. Subdivisions gave way to farmland. The road here was damaged. Cracks, heaves, potholes, but passable. But the sky was changing. The sepia haze of the morning was darkening. It wasn't nightfall. It was only noon. It was stuff coming down. At first, I thought it was snow. Grey flakes drifting onto the windshield. I turned on the wipers. Squeak smear. It smeared black. Ash. The friction of the tectonic plates grinding together wasn't just shaking the earth. It was pulverizing the bedrock. And somewhere, deep underground, the friction was creating enough heat to vent volcanic gases and particulate matter. Or maybe a refinery had gone up. Or a chemical plant. Either way, the world was turning grey. The ash swirled in the jeep's headlights. It coated the hood in a fine, gritty layer. I rolled up the window, despite the broken glass in the back. The air smelled like burnt matches and copper. We reached the foothills of Blackwood Ridge around 1 p.m. The landscape here was different. The rolling hills of the farmland crashed into the steep, rocky incline of the mountains. The road began to climb. Switchbacks. Tight turns. The jeep was struggling. The air filter was probably clogging with ash. The temperature gauge was creeping up. I rounded a sharp bend, mile marker 15. Halfway there. And then I slammed on the brakes. The road didn't end. It didn't collapse. It was blocked. But not by men. A massive pine tree, easily 4 feet in diameter, had fallen across the asphalt. Its roots were a tangled wall of earth on the left. Its crown hung off the cliff on the right. There was no way around. The cliff face went up on one side and down on the other. I killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, muffled now by the falling ash. "End of the line for the wheels, Buster," I said. I got out. The ash was accumulating on the asphalt, muffling my footsteps. It was quiet. Dead quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the soft hiss of the grey flakes landing on the hot hood of the jeep. I walked to the tree. It was fresh. The sap smelled sharp, cutting through the sulphur stench of the air. I climbed up onto the trunk to look over. On the other side of the tree, the road continued. Empty. winding up into the grey fog. 15 miles. On foot. Uphill. In ash. I looked back at the jeep. It had been a good tool. It had saved our lives. But you don't marry your tools. You use them until they break or until they can't go any further, and then you drop them. I opened the back. I grabbed my pack. I checked the rifle. I filled my pockets with the loose ammunition. I looked at the water. I had the 2 bottles I stole from the dead soldier, plus a gallon jug I'd found in the jeep. Water is heavy. 8 pounds a gallon. I poured half the gallon into a bowl for Buster. "Drink up," I said. "Camel up. We're walking." He lapped it up greedily. I shouldered the pack. It was heavy, pulling on my injured ribs. I winced, adjusting the straps. "Let's go." We climbed over the tree trunk. My boots slipped on the bark. Buster scrambled over, claws scratching for purchase. We landed on the other side. I took one look back at the jeep, sitting there in the falling ash, looking like a toy abandoned by a child. Then I turned toward the ridge. We walked for 2 hours. The incline was brutal. My breath rasped in my throat. The ash was getting into everything. My nose, my mouth, the action of the rifle. I had to wrap a bandana around my face. Around 3 p.m., we reached a plateau. The road flattened out for a stretch, passing through a dense stand of hemlock trees. The trees protected the road from the ash fall. The air was clearer here. I stopped to rest, leaning against a guardrail. I took a sip of water. Buster growled. It was a low rumble deep in his chest. The hair on his back stood up in a rigid line. I capped the water bottle slowly. I lowered my hand to the rifle. "What is it, boy?" He was staring into the trees, into the deep shadows of the hemlocks. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing, just the dark vertical lines of the tree trunks. Then, one of the trunks moved. It wasn't a tree. It was a bear. A black bear. But it wasn't right. It stepped out onto the road, 30 yards away. It was gaunt, its fur patchy. It moved with a strange, lurching gait. But it wasn't the bear that froze my blood. It was what the bear was running from. Behind the bear, the trees were moving, not swaying in the wind. They were trembling. The ground under the forest floor was rippling. A wave of earth, like a mole tunnel but 10 feet wide, was moving through the woods, uprooting trees as it went. It was chasing the bear. The liquefaction. It wasn't just gravity anymore. The pressure underground was forcing the soil upward in traveling waves. The bear huffed, terrified, and broke into a run, straight toward us. I raised the rifle. "No," I whispered. "Not the bear." The bear wasn't attacking. It was fleeing. It thundered past us on the other side of the road, ignoring us completely. It was running for its life. The wave of earth hit the edge of the road. The asphalt 10 yards in front of me buckled. It exploded upward, showering us with chunks of blacktop. A fissure opened up, spewing steam and black mud. We were cut off. The road ahead was gone. The wave was moving across the pavement, destroying everything in its path. I turned around. The wave was widening. It was eating the road behind us too. We were trapped on a 100-yard section of asphalt, with a cliff on one side and a landslide on the other. And the wave was turning. It was heading toward the cliff, toward us. I've spent my whole life trusting the ground. You do too. You don't think about it. You take a step, and you assume the earth will be there to meet your foot. It's the most basic contract in existence. When that contract is broken, your mind doesn't know how to process it. The wave of soil coming out of the hemlock forest wasn't fast, like a tsunami of water. It was slow. It was heavy. It was a churning wall of dirt, rock, and root systems, about 8 feet high, rolling forward with the inevitability of a glacier. It hit the guardrail 10 yards to my left. The steel rail didn't bend. It snapped. The metal posts were sheared off like toothpicks. The asphalt beneath them crumbled, folding upward into jagged plates before being swallowed by the brown slurry. I looked at the cliff edge on my right. It wasn't a vertical drop, thank God. It was a steep 45-degree embankment covered in scree and scrub brush, tumbling down into the ravine below. I looked at Buster. He was pressing himself against my leg, whining, his body trembling so hard it shook mine. "We have to fly, buddy," I yelled over the grinding roar of the earth. I didn't give him a choice. I grabbed the handle of his harness with my left hand. I clutched the rifle against my chest with my right. I threw us over the edge. We didn't jump. We just leaned into gravity and let go. The first 2 seconds were freefall. Then we hit the slope. My boots slammed into loose shale. My legs went out from under me instantly. I hit the ground on my side, the side with the bad ribs. The pain was a white-hot flash that whited out my vision. I screamed, but the sound was knocked out of me as we began to slide. It was an avalanche of 1 man and 1 dog. We tumbled. I tried to dig my heels in, but the scree was too loose. It moved with us. I was surfing on a river of sharp rocks. Branches whipped my face. A sapling caught my backpack, jerking me backward violently, spinning me around so I was sliding head first. Protect the head. I curled into a ball, tucking my chin, hugging the rifle. I felt Buster scrambling against me, claws digging into my parka, trying to find purchase. We slid for what felt like a mile. In reality, it was probably 200 feet. We hit the bottom of the ravine with a wet, heavy thud. We landed in a drift of dead leaves and mud. I rolled twice and came to a stop against the rotting trunk of a fallen oak tree. I lay there. I didn't move. I waited for the wave of earth from the road above to come down and bury us. I listened. Siarash. Rumble. The sound was above us. The wave had consumed the road, pushed over the edge, and spilled some debris down the slope. A shower of rocks and asphalt chunks rained down around us, clicking against the tree trunks. But the main mass of the landslide had stopped at the ledge. The wave had lost its energy once it ran out of the pressure from the liquefaction zone. It stopped. I lay in the dirt, gasping. Every breath was a negotiation with my rib cage. Shallow breaths hurt. Deep breaths felt like being stabbed. "Buster!" I croaked. A wet nose shoved into my ear. He was there. He was panting, whining, licking the blood and dirt off my cheek. I reached up and grabbed his fur. He was solid. He was warm. I forced myself to sit up. The world spun. I had to brace my hands against the rotting wood of the log to keep from tipping over. We were in the bottom of a deep ravine. The canopy overhead was thick, blocking out the grey sky. Down here, the twilight was deep and heavy. I checked myself. My parka was shredded on the right sleeve. My pants were torn at the knee, revealing a scrape that was oozing blood mixed with ash. But my legs worked. My arms worked. I checked the rifle. The barrel was packed with mud. The scope was scratched, maybe knocked off 0. I'd have to clear the obstruction before I could fire it, or the barrel would explode. I pulled the water bottle from my pack. It was dented, but intact. I took a sip. "Okay," I whispered. "We're alive. We're lower than we wanted to be, but we're alive." I looked at my compass. The needle was spinning. It wasn't finding north. It was drifting lazily clockwise, then counterclockwise. Magnetic anomalies. The shifting crust wasn't just moving dirt. It was messing with the local magnetic field. Or maybe the iron deposits in the rock were moving. "Great," I muttered. "No road. No compass. Just up." I looked at the slope we had just fallen down. It was a scar of exposed earth. We couldn't go back up that way. It was too loose, too steep. We had to follow the ravine. It ran perpendicular to the ridge. If we followed it upstream, it should, in theory, lead us to the saddle of the mountain. From there, I could find the trail to the cabin. "Wockies," I said to Buster. I tried to sound cheerful. I sounded like a ghost. We started walking. The ravine was a nightmare of obstacles. Fallen trees, tangles of briar, and pools of stagnant water. The ash was falling heavily now, drifting down through the branches like grey snow. It coated everything. The leaves were grey. The moss was grey. Buster's golden fur was turning the color of cement. As the light faded, the forest changed. Shadows stretched and twisted. The trees, stressed by the ground movement, were making noises. Creak. Pop groan. It sounded like the woods were arguing with themselves. And then the hallucinations started. It happens when you're exhausted, dehydrated, and under extreme stress. Your brain tries to find patterns in the chaos. I started seeing faces in the bark of the hemlock trees. Not scary faces. Just people. Watching. I saw a man in a hard hat standing by a rock. I blinked, and it was just a stump. I saw a woman in a white dress walking parallel to us on the ridge line. I stopped and stared. She dissolved into a patch of mist. "Get it together, Elias," I muttered. "Focus on the dog. The dog is real." I watched Buster's tail. It was my beacon. As long as that tail was moving, I kept moving. Night fell like a hammer. 1 minute it was dusk, and the next I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The cloud cover and the ash blocked all starlight. I fumbled for my flashlight. I hesitated. Light meant exposure. If there were other people in these woods, other desperate, armed people, a light was a target. But I couldn't walk in this. One misstep in the dark could mean a broken leg. And a broken leg here, alone, meant death. I compromised. I took the red lens filter out of my pack, part of the camping gear I'd grabbed, and snapped it over the light. I clicked it on. The world turned into a blood-colored tunnel. The red light didn't ruin my night vision, and it didn't carry as far as white light. We walked in the red bubble. The ash looked like falling embers now. It felt like walking through hell. Around 9 p.m., my body quit. It wasn't a conscious decision. My legs just stopped lifting. I stumbled over a root and went down to my knees. I tried to get up, but my muscles refused to fire. "Okay," I wheezed. "Okay." We stop. I found a spot under a rocky overhang, a small limestone shelf jutting out from the side of the ravine. It offered some protection from the falling ash. I crawled in. It was tight, smelling of damp stone and animal musk. I pulled Buster in with me. I unrolled the sleeping bag I'd salvaged. It was a lightweight summer bag, not meant for near-freezing temperatures, but it was all I had. I sat with my back against the rock, the rifle across my lap. I used a stick to clean the mud out of the barrel, working by feel in the dark. I poured a handful of dog food onto the rock for Buster. He ate it fast, crunching loudly in the silence. I ate a spoonful of peanut butter. It stuck to the roof of my mouth, dry and cloying. I didn't start a fire. Too dangerous. I zipped the sleeping bag up to my chin, pulling Buster inside the unzipped warmth of it. We huddled together, sharing body heat. That's when the phantom vibration syndrome hit. I was sitting perfectly still. The rock I was leaning against was solid. The ground wasn't moving. But my brain swore it was. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the lurch. I felt the drop. I felt the floor sliding out from under me. I jerked awake, gasping, heart hammering, grabbing the rock to steady myself. But nothing was moving. It's like getting off a boat after a week at sea, but 1,000 times worse. My inner ear was broken. My sense of balance was traumatized. I couldn't sleep. I just sat there in the red dark, shivering, stroking the dog's head, listening to the forest groan. And then I heard the sound that wasn't a hallucination. Clink. Metal on stone. It came from down the ravine. The way we had come. I froze. My hand clamped over Buster's muzzle before he could growl. Crunch. Crunch. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. They were following our trail. I clicked off the red light. The darkness was absolute. I held my breath, straining my ears against the ringing silence. Someone was out there. Someone was tracking us in the dark. And they weren't using a light. Fear has a taste. It tastes like copper pennies and battery acid. It coats the back of your throat and makes it impossible to swallow. I sat in the black void under the rock shelf, my hand clamped over Buster's snout. He was rigid against me, a warm statue of muscle and fur. He smelled the intruder before I heard them. Crunch. The footstep was close, maybe 20 feet away. It wasn't a stumble. It was a placement. Someone, or something, was testing the ground before committing their weight. I gripped the rifle, but I didn't raise it. In a space this confined, the muzzle flash would blind me instantly. And the noise. The noise would announce my position to everything within 5 miles. I slowly released my grip on the rifle and reached for the utility knife in my pocket. I clicked the blade out. 2 inches of razor-sharp steel. It felt pathetic against the dark. Sniff. A sharp, wet inhalation. My heart stopped. That wasn't a human sniff. It wasn't the sound of a guy with a runny nose. It was the deep, intake-heavy scenting of a predator. The footsteps changed. They went from the heavy crunch of 2 feet to the lighter, rhythmic patter of 4. Click, click, click. Claws on stone. Coyotes. Or feral dogs. The disaster hadn't just displaced people. It had pushed the wildlife out of the deep woods. They were hungry. They were scavenging the kill zone. A shape detached itself from the darkness at the edge of the overhang. I couldn't see features, just a silhouette that was darker than the night around it. It was low to the ground, hunched shoulders, head low. It paused at the entrance to our cave. I could hear its breathing. Rapid, shallow pants. I could smell it, wet fur and old blood. Buster vibrated against my ribs. He wanted to growl. He wanted to defend his pack. I squeezed his neck, a silent command. Do not engage. If it was one coyote, Buster could take it. But coyotes don't travel alone. If there was one, there were 6. The shadow took a step closer. It was 3 feet from my boots. I tightened my grip on the knife. I picked my target. The neck. If it lunged, I would have to drive the blade into the jugular and hold on while it thrashed. The shadow lowered its head. It sniffed the rock where I had spilled the few kernels of dog food earlier. It licked the stone. A wet, rasping sound. Then it stopped. It raised its head. It looked straight into the back of the cave. I stared into the void where its eyes should be. I projected every ounce of violence I had left in my soul. Come in, I thought. Come in and see what happens. The shadow huffed. A sharp, dismissive exhale. It turned and trotted away, dissolving back into the noise of the ravine. I heard the others then. A rustle in the leaves. A snap of a twig further down the slope. The pack moving on. They were looking for easy meat. Injured deer. Trapped raccoons. They decided we weren't dead enough yet. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent the next 6 hours in a state of suspended animation, listening to the ash fall. It sounded like rain, but softer, more suffocating. Dawn didn't break. It just seeped in. The black turned to charcoal, then to a flat, dead grey. I crawled out from under the rock shelf. My joints popped like pistol shots. My bad leg, the one I'd wrenched in the fall, was stiff as a board. I looked at the world. It was gone. The forest had vanished under a shroud of grey. The ash had fallen all night. It was 3 inches deep on the ground, smoothing out the contours of the roots and rocks. Every tree branch was outlined in white-grey powder. It looked like a photo negative. No colour. Just black trees and grey snow. "Come on, Buster," I rasped. My voice was wrecked from the smoke and the silence. We shook the ash off our coats. A cloud of dust rose up around us. I checked the compass again. Still spinning. Useless. "Uphill," I said. "We go up until we run out of up." The climb out of the ravine was a blur of misery. The ash made the ground slick. Beneath the powder, the leaves were wet and rotting. For every 2 steps up, we slid 1 step back. I had to use the rifle as a crutch, digging the stock into the mud to lever myself up the steep sections. We climbed for 3 hours. The silence was absolute. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of my own wheezing breath and the scrunch-scrunch of boots in ash. The trees began to thin out. We were reaching the higher elevation. The hemlocks gave way to scrub oak and granite outcroppings. Around noon, we broke the tree line. I stumbled onto a flat ridge of exposed rock. The wind hit us here, cold and biting. It stripped the ash away, leaving the granite bare. I dropped my pack and fell to my knees, gasping. I looked back the way we had come. From this height, I could see the scar of the valley. It looked like a giant hand had dragged fingernails through the earth. The forest was torn apart in long, parallel strips where the ground had rippled. I looked north, toward the peaks, and there it was, Blackwood Ridge. It was the highest point in the county, a sharp spine of rock that rose above the tree line, and halfway up the slope, nestled in a dense patch of evergreens that had somehow survived the slide, a glint of metal, a tin roof. The cabin. It was still there. It was maybe 4 miles away, across a saddle of rocky terrain. I felt a surge of adrenaline that almost knocked me over. It's there. It's real. "We made it, buddy," I told Buster, pointing a shaking finger at the distant speck. "Home is right there." But between us and the cabin, the terrain was wrong. The saddle, the dip between the 2 peaks, was usually a smooth, grassy ridge. Now it was broken. A massive fissure had opened up right across the spine of the ridge. It was wide, maybe 50 feet across, a jagged wound in the rock. Steam was venting from it, curling up into the grey sky, and standing on the edge of that fissure, blocking the only path to the cabin, was a structure, not a geological formation, a man-made structure. I squinted, wiping the ash from my eyes. It was a roadblock. Vehicles. 3 of them, parked nose to tail across the narrowest part of the trail. And people. I pulled the rifle into my shoulder, using the scope to bridge the distance. The magnification brought them into focus. 4 men, dressed in mismatched camo, carrying rifles. They weren't looking south, toward the city. They were looking north, toward the cabin. They weren't guarding the ridge from refugees. They were laying siege to it. My stomach turned over. The cabin wasn't empty. Sarah and Emily were there. I knew it in my bones. But someone else had found them first, and they were trying to get in. I lowered the rifle. The relief of finding the cabin evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't a survivor anymore. I wasn't a refugee. I was a flanking maneuver. I checked the magazine in the AR-15. 20 rounds left. I checked my pocket. 4 loose rounds. I looked at Buster. Quiet mode, pal. We're hunting. I didn't walk across the open ridge. I dropped below the skyline, moving into the brush on the leeward side of the slope. I moved fast. The pain in my ribs was just information now. Damage detected. Ignore. I closed the distance. 3 miles. 2 miles. As I got closer, the sound of the wind changed. It wasn't just wind anymore. Pop. A gunshot. Distant, thin, carried on the breeze. Then another. Pop. They were shooting at the cabin. And then a different sound answered. Boom. Deeper. Louder. A heavy caliber. A hunting rifle. My grandfather's .30-06. The one Sarah kept in the gun safe. She was shooting back. I started to run. I ran through the scrub brush, tearing my clothes, scraping my skin. The ash flew up around my legs. I reached the final rise before the fissure. I crawled the last 50 yards on my belly, dragging the rifle through the dirt. I peered over the edge of the rock. I was 300 yards from the roadblock. The men were using the trucks as cover. They were pinned down. Every time one of them popped his head up to fire, a round from the cabin would slam into the truck bodywork. Thwack. "Give it up," one of the men yelled. His voice echoed off the rocks. "We have gas. We'll burn you out." Sarah didn't answer with words. She answered with lead. Another shot rang out, shattering the side mirror of the lead truck. I scanned the scene. They were focused entirely on the cabin ahead of them. They had no idea there was anyone behind them. But I had a problem. The fissure. The crack in the earth separated me from them. It was 50 feet wide and God knows how deep. The trucks were on the far side, the cabin side. I was on the wrong side of the gap. I couldn't cross it. Not here. I looked left. The fissure ran down the side of the mountain, widening into a canyon. I looked right. The fissure narrowed as it went up toward the peak. About a quarter-mile up, it pinched closed into a series of jagged steps. I could cross there. But to get there, I had to expose myself on the skyline. If I moved, they might see me. If they saw me, they'd pin me down. And while they were pinning me down, they'd rush the cabin. I needed a distraction. I looked at Buster. He was lying flat in the brush, watching me. "I'm sorry, buddy," I whispered. "I need you to be loud." I pointed down the slope, away from my path, into the thick brush. "Go," I whispered. "Bark. Go." Buster knew the command. He hesitated, looking at the danger, then he launched himself. He bounded down the slope, crashing through the dry brush, making as much noise as a bear. He stopped 50 yards down and let out a string of deep, booming barks. The men at the trucks spun around. What was that? Check the flank. Something's in the bushes. 2 of the men turned their weapons away from the cabin, aiming down the slope at the noise. It was my window. I sprinted. I broke cover, running uphill toward the pinch point in the fissure. I ran hunched over, legs pumping, lungs burning. I was fully exposed on the granite face for 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3. I heard shouting. "Runner!" High side. Crack. A bullet chipped the rock 3 feet behind me. "Don't look back. Just run." Crack. Zing. Another one. Closer. I threw myself at the gap in the fissure. It was 5 feet wide here. I jumped. For a second, I was suspended over the steam vent, looking down into the crushing darkness of the earth. My boots hit the other side. I scrambled, clawing at the rock, dragging myself over the lip. I rolled behind a boulder just as a volley of automatic fire chewed up the ground where I had landed. I was across. I was on the same side as the cabin, and I was behind them. I lay against the cold stone, checking the rifle. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. I was 200 yards from the men who were trying to kill my family. I clicked the safety off. "Honey," I whispered, "I'm home." You don't think about the person on the other end of the scope. You can't. If you think about their childhood, or their mother, or what they had for breakfast, you'll hesitate. And if you hesitate, your family dies. I forced my world to shrink. I wasn't Elias the father. I wasn't Elias the water treatment operator. I was just an eye and a finger. I settled the red dot on the man standing by the rear truck. He was the one holding a red gas can. He was preparing to run toward the cabin porch to pour it out. Distance, 200 yards. Wind, left to right, maybe 10 miles an hour. Hold on the left shoulder. I exhaled. My breath misted the optic for a split second. I squeezed. Crack. The rifle bucked against my bruised shoulder. The red gas can in the man's hand exploded. I didn't hit him. I hit the fuel. A spray of pink liquid erupted outward, soaking his legs. He screamed, dropping the shredded plastic handle. He didn't ignite, but the fuel was everywhere. He scrambled backward, slipping on the wet rocks, shouting in panic. "Sniper! Rear! Rear!" The other 3 men spun around. Their formation broke instantly. They were sandwiched. Sarah in the front, an unknown shooter in the back. Sarah didn't miss the beat. Boom! Her hunting rifle roared from the cabin window. One of the men, who had turned to look at me, took a round in the shoulder. He spun like a top and went down hard in the ash. Cover! Get cover! They dove behind the trucks. They were pinned. I didn't stay still. Shoot and move. That's what the soldier at the train wreck would have done. I scrambled to my right, keeping low behind a spine of granite. I moved 20 yards, changing my angle. I popped up. They were firing blindly at my last position. Bullets chipped the rock where I had been 10 seconds ago. I lined up again. The man with the injured shoulder was trying to crawl under the chassis of the pickup. I fired a warning shot into the dirt 3 feet from his head. Thwack! "Leave!" I screamed. My voice felt like it was tearing my throat out. "Leave, or you die here." Silence. Just the wind and the whimpering of the wounded man. Then the leader, the guy in the passenger seat of the middle truck, yelled back, "Who are you?" "I'm the guy behind you," I yelled. "And I'm the guy with the wife inside. You have 10 seconds to start walking south. If I see a weapon, I fire." I heard them arguing. Urgent, hushed whispers. They were bullies. Scavengers. They wanted an easy target, a woman and a kid in a lonely cabin. They didn't sign up for a two-front war. "We're going," the leader shouted. "Don't shoot. We're grabbing the wounded." 2 of them grabbed the man with the shoulder hit. They dragged him upright. They left their gas cans. They left the 3rd truck. They started hobbling down the trail, back toward the blockade, hands half raised. I kept the rifle trained on them. I watched them until they disappeared over the crest of the ridge, vanishing into the grey ash fog. I didn't lower the weapon. I waited a full minute. Then I turned toward the cabin. It looked rough. The tin roof was dented. The wood siding near the window was splintered from their bullets. The front door was closed. The window was dark. "Sarah!" I called out. I didn't stand up yet. "It's Elias. They're gone." Silence from the house. She was smart. She wasn't going to open the door just because someone yelled my name. "Sarah, it's me. I have the Jeep." Well, I had a Jeep. I have Buster. He's down the slope. The front door creaked. It opened an inch. I saw the glint of the .30-06 barrel poking out. "What did you leave on the nightstand?" Her voice was shaky, but fierce. "A Polaroid," I said, my voice cracking. "Of us at the cabin. You wrote on the back that you took the Glock." The door flew open. She stepped out. She looked terrified. Her hair was matted, her face smeared with soot. She was wearing my oversized flannel shirt. She lowered the rifle. "Elias!" I stood up from behind the rocks. I slung the rifle over my back and limped toward her. She dropped her gun on the porch and ran. She hit me so hard we both almost fell over. She buried her face in my neck, sobbing. I wrapped my arms around her, ignoring the screaming pain in my ribs, holding her as tight as I could. "You're here," she cried. "You're actually here." "I told you," I whispered into her hair. It smelled like gunpowder and wood smoke. "I'm coming." A small shape appeared in the doorway. Emily. She was holding a flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. She looked so small, but her eyes were hard. She looked older than 9. "Daddy!" I fell to my knees. Sarah let go, and Emily ran into the huddle. I pulled them both in, burying my face in their warmth. For the first time in 3 days, the cold inside my chest thawed. "I got you," I said, rocking them back and forth. "I got you." We stayed like that for a long time, just a pile of humans on a freezing porch at the end of the world. Eventually, Sarah pulled back. She wiped her eyes, smearing the soot. She looked at me, really looked at me. She saw the blood on my cheek, the way I was favoring my side, the exhaustion in my eyes. "You look like hell, Elias," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "You should see the Jeep," I managed a weak laugh. "Where's Buster?" Emily asked, looking past me. I whistled. A sharp, 2-note blast. A minute later, a grey, ash-covered ghost trotted up the trail. Buster wagged his tail, barking once. Emily squealed and ran to him. We went inside. The cabin was a fortress. Sarah had pushed the heavy oak table against the door. The windows were boarded up with planks torn from the interior shelves. In the center of the room, the wood stove was glowing warm. On top of it, a pot of water was boiling. "We have food," Sarah said. "We have water from the cistern. We were okay until the men showed up this morning." "You did good," I said, sinking onto the bench. "You held them off." "I was down to 3 rounds," she admitted, her voice trembling again. "If you hadn't come. I'm here now." She handed me a mug of hot water. I drank it. It felt like life itself flowing back into my veins. "So what now?" she asked. "Do we stay? We have the high ground. We have the cabin." I looked around the room. It was warm. It was safe. It was everything I had been fighting to reach. But then I felt it. The vibration. It wasn't the rattle of the wind. It was coming up through the floorboards. The coffee in my mug rippled. I looked at the stone fireplace. A crack had appeared in the mortar. It ran from the hearth to the ceiling. As I watched, a flake of dust drifted out of the crack. I stood up, walking to the window. I pried one of the boards loose to look out at the peak. The fissure I had jumped across, the one separating the trail from the cabin. It was smoking. Not just white steam anymore. Black smoke. And it was wider. I looked at the ground near the porch. The snow and ash were melting. The earth was steaming. The geothermal heat was rising. The friction of the tectonic plates was turning the mountain into a radiator. "We can't stay," I said softly. Sarah froze. "What?" "The ridge," I said, turning to face them. "It's splitting. The friction is heating up the rock. If we stay here, we cook, or the whole peak slides into the valley." "But where?" Sarah asked, panic creeping back into her voice. "The valley is gone. The roads are gone. This was the safe place." I walked to the table where my grandfather's old topographic map was pinned under a lantern. I traced the spine of the ridge. "We can't go south," I said. "Blocked by the landslide. We can't go east, back to the city. The men went west." I moved my finger north. "The power lines," I said. A massive high-tension transmission corridor ran along the northern spine of the mountains. It was a clear-cut swath, 300 feet wide, maintained by the utility company. "It follows the bedrock," I said. "They build the towers on the most stable ground, and it leads to the hydroelectric dam at the state line." "The dam?" Sarah asked. "Won't it be destroyed?" "Maybe," I said. "But the dam has a maintenance airfield, a flat, concrete strip on the upper plateau. It was a gamble, a massive one, but staying here was a death sentence." "How far?" Emily asked. 12 miles, I said. "Along the ridge line." Boom. A sound like thunder, but from underground. The cabin lurched. A plate fell off the shelf and shattered. "We leave now," I said. "Pack only what we can carry. Water, ammo, layers." We moved fast. The reunion was over. Survival mode was back. I swapped my shredded parka for an old wool hunting coat of my grandfather's. I reloaded the magazines. Sarah packed the food. Emily leashed Buster. 10 minutes later, we stood on the porch. The fissure down the trail had widened to 10 feet. We could see the orange glow of magma deep down in the throat of the earth. "Say goodbye to the house," I said. We stepped off the porch and headed north, into the grey ash and the fading light. We hadn't gone 100 yards when the ground behind us gave way. I turned just in time to see the cabin, my grandfather's cabin, our sanctuary, tilt. The foundation crumbled. The entire structure slid slowly, gracefully, into the widening maw of the fissure. It disappeared into the smoke. Sarah squeezed my hand. Hard. "Don't look back," she said. She was quoting me. We turned north. The walk was grueling. The ash was deeper here, almost to our knees. The wind howled through the transmission towers, making the wires sing a mournful, metallic song. We walked for hours. The sun set, and we kept moving by the light of the burning mountain behind us. Around midnight, we reached the highest point of the traverse, the Devil's Spine, a narrow fin of rock with a 1,000-foot drop on either side. I went first, holding Emily's hand. Sarah followed with Buster. The wind up here was ferocious. It tried to tear us off the rock. "Stay low," I yelled. "Crab walk." We were halfway across the spine when I saw it. In the distance, to the north. Lights. Not fire. Not explosions. Electric lights. White, steady, electric beams. The dam. It was still there. And it had power. "Look." I pointed. Sarah gasped. "Is that?" "Power," I said. "Structure. Stability." We picked up the pace. Hope is a powerful fuel. But the mountain wasn't done with us. As we stepped off the narrow spine onto the wider plateau, the ground in front of me hissed. A vent opened up. A jet of superheated steam erupted directly in our path, separating me from Sarah and Emily. "Back!" I yelled, stumbling backward, shielding my face from the heat. The vent was a wall of white pressure. I couldn't see through it. "Sarah! Emily! We're here!" Sarah's voice came from the other side. "We can't cross. It's too hot." I looked around. The vent was growing. The ground was cracking in a circle around us. The ridge was fragmenting. I was on one side. They were on the other. And the path to the lights, to the dam, was on their side. I realized with a sinking heart that I couldn't get to them, and they couldn't come to me. "Listen to me," I shouted through the roar of the steam. "You have to go. The path to the dam is clear on your side. Go." "No," Emily screamed. "Not without you. You have to," I yelled. "Take the map. Follow the towers. I'll find another way around. I'll meet you there." It was a lie. There was no other way around. The cliff was on my left, the landslide on my right. I was cut off. "Elias!" Sarah's voice broke. She knew. She looked at the map. She knew the geography. "Go, Sarah," I commanded. "Take our daughter and go to the lights. If you stay, the ground takes you. Go." I saw her shadow through the steam. She hesitated. Then she grabbed Emily's hand. "I love you," she screamed. "We'll wait for you. We'll wait at the lights. I love you. Go." I watched their shadows recede, moving away from the danger, moving toward the safety of the dam. I stood there alone on the crumbling edge of the world. The steam vent roared. The ground beneath my boots began to tilt. I turned around. The only path left for me was down. Not the safe way. The hard way. into the dark ravine on the west side of the ridge. I adjusted the strap of my rifle. I whistled to Buster, who was, thank God, on my side of the vent. "Well, buddy," I said to the dog, "looks like we're taking the scenic route." I stepped off the edge, sliding down into the darkness, as the ridge where I had just been standing collapsed into the fire. I used to think I knew what bottom felt like. I thought it was the divorce of my parents when I was 12. I thought it was the day I got the foreclosure notice on the first house. I was wrong. Bottom is physical. It's the place where gravity stops pulling because you can't go any lower. I hit the bottom of the West Ravine at 40 miles an hour. It wasn't a slide. It was a collision. I tumbled through a screen of briars that tore my face open, bounced off a limestone outcrop, and landed in a pool of freezing muck. The impact turned the lights out. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes? An hour? I woke up because I was drowning. My face was in the mud. The water was rising. I sputtered, rolling onto my back, gasping for air that tasted like wet ashes and blood. Pain. It wasn't localized anymore. It was a symphony. My ribs were a jagged line of fire. My left knee was throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. My hands were raw meat. "Buster!" I croaked. A soft whine from the darkness. He was there, shivering. He was hurt too, limping on his front paw, but he was standing. I looked up, way up. Through the gaps in the shifting grey clouds, I saw the ridge line I had fallen from. It was 1,000 feet above us, and beyond it, glowing like a halo against the smoke, the lights of the dam. They were so close, yet impossible. To get there, I had to climb a mountain that was currently shaking itself apart. "We move," I whispered. "If we stop, we freeze." I stood up. My left leg buckled. I caught myself on a driftwood log. I found a heavy stick, jamming it into the mud as a cane. We started walking north, parallel to the ridge. The ravine floor was an alien landscape. It was a boneyard of trees, massive oaks and pines that had been shaken off the slopes above and piled up down here in tangled heaps. We had to climb over trunks as wide as cars, crawl under root systems that looked like cages. The ash here was thick, mixing with the groundwater to form a grey paste that sucked at our boots. Step, drag, step, drag. I checked the compass. Still spinning. I checked my watch. The crystal was smashed, the hands frozen at 12:42. Time didn't matter. Only distance. We walked for what felt like an eternity. The roar of the water grew louder. Ruawea. It wasn't the sound of a river. It was the sound of a machine. We rounded a bend in the canyon, and there it was, the hydroelectric dam. From the top, it looks like a road. From the bottom, it looks like the wall of a fortress built by giants. It was a curved face of concrete, 300 feet high, stretching across the valley. The floodgates were open. Jets of white water were blasting out from the base, churning the river into a violent, misty frenzy. The spray hit us instantly, freezing and soaking. I looked up at the top of the wall. I could see the floodlights mounted on the railing. I could see figures moving up there, tiny silhouettes against the glare. Sarah and Emily were up there. I was down here. There was no elevator. There were no stairs. Just a sheer face of wet concrete. I scanned the wall. The main face was unclimbable. But on the far left side, where the concrete met the natural rock of the canyon wall, there was a structure. The spillway. It was a massive concrete chute, designed to carry overflow water safely down the slope. Right now it was dry, or mostly dry. A thin sheet of algae-slick water trickled down the center. It was steep, maybe a 45-degree angle, and stepped, like a giant staircase for a guard. It was the only way up. "Come on, Buster," I yelled over the roar of the water. We waded through the tail race, the freezing current tugging at my legs. We reached the base of the spillway. The first step was 5 feet high. I had to lift Buster up, his wet fur heavy in my arms. He scrabbled for grip, claws slipping on the concrete, until he hauled himself onto the ledge. Then he turned and barked at me. I threw my pack up. I threw the rifle up. Then I reached for the edge. I pulled. My ribs screamed. I felt something shift inside my chest, a pop, then a grind. I cried out, a raw, animal sound, but I didn't let go. I kicked my good leg against the wall and hauled myself up. 1 step. 300 feet to go. The climb was a blur of agony. Step by step. Lift the dog. Throw the gear. Lift myself. Halfway up, the vertigo hit. I looked back. The river below was a churning white ribbon. The world tilted. My vision tunneled. "Just let go," a voice in my head whispered. "It's easy. Just slide back down. Go to sleep." I looked at the step above me. Buster was there. He was looking down, whining, his tail thumping against the concrete. He wasn't waiting for me to lead. He was waiting for me to follow. "I'm coming," I gasped. I grabbed the concrete. It was rough, cold, real. We kept climbing. 200 feet. My hands were bleeding freely now, leaving red smears on the grey wall. 250 feet. The roar of the dam was deafening here. The vibration of the water passing through the turbines shook the concrete under my belly. I reached the final step. Above me was a metal railing, the maintenance walkway. I pushed Buster up one last time. He squeezed under the bottom rail and shook himself, spraying water everywhere. I reached up. My fingers brushed the cold steel of the railing. I pulled. My strength was gone. My arms were trembling jelly. I hung there, feet dangling, chest heaving, staring at the black sky. I can't do it. Then a hand grabbed my wrist. It wasn't Sarah's hand. It was too big. Then another hand grabbed my coat. I got him. Heave. I was hauled upward. I scraped over the edge of the concrete and flopped onto a metal grating. I lay there, staring up at the blinding white glare of a halogen floodlight. Faces appeared in the light. A man in a hard hat. A woman in a security uniform. And then, pushing through them, Elias. Sarah. She fell onto me. She didn't care about the mud or the blood. She buried her face in my chest. "You made it," she sobbed. I watched the ridge collapse. I thought. I took the scenic route, I wheezed. I felt a small hand grab mine. Emily. She was crying silently, holding onto my fingers like they were a lifeline. "Is Buster okay?" she asked. "He beat me here," I whispered. I tried to sit up, but the man in the hard hat put a hand on my shoulder. "Stay down, son," he said. His voice was gruff but kind. "We have a medic. You're safe. You're inside the perimeter." I looked around. We were on the top of the dam. It was a hive of activity. There were trucks, generators, tents. People were moving with purpose. Beyond the tents, on the flat concrete expanse of the airfield, helicopters, military Chinooks. Their rotors were turning, a slow, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that sounded better than any music I had ever heard. They were loading people. "The dam is holding," the man said, following my gaze. "But the tectonic shift is moving north. We're evacuating to the stable zone in the Dakotas. You made it just in time for the last bird." I looked at Sarah. Her face was illuminated by the strobing lights of the helicopter. She looked exhausted, battered, but alive. "We made it," she said. I looked back at the south, over the railing. The world I knew was gone. The valley was a black scar. The city was a memory. The heights were burning. The contract with the earth was broken. The ground we stood on wasn't a guarantee anymore. It was a privilege. I closed my eyes. "Okay," I said. "Let's fly." Lifting off the ground feels like a betrayal. After 3 days of fighting for every inch of dirt, after bleeding into the soil and watching the earth swallow everything I owned, leaving it felt wrong. It felt like quitting. But then the Chinook banked. The massive twin rotors bit into the cold air, and the dam fell away beneath us. Through the porthole window, I watched the concrete wall shrink. It looked like a grey toothpick holding back a white ocean. And I saw the fires. From 3,000 feet, you don't see the tragedy. You see the map. The entire eastern horizon was a jagged line of orange and black. The fracture zones were glowing. The grid was dead. The world down there was dark, except where it was burning. I looked across the cargo bay. It was packed with refugees. People wrapped in silver thermal blankets, clutching cats, clutching photos, clutching each other. Their faces were masks of soot and shock. But in the center of the bench opposite me, Sarah was asleep. She was slumped against the nylon webbing of the seat, her head resting on her shoulder. Her hand was resting on Emily's knee. Emily was awake. She was staring out the window, watching the world burn with that terrifying adaptability of children. In her lap, she held Buster's leash. The dog was curled up on the metal floor, snoring over the roar of the engines. I looked at my own hands. They were bandaged. The medic at the dam had wrapped them in clean white gauze. They didn't look like my hands. They looked like tools that had been used until they broke. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom system, a calm, godlike voice in my headset. "ETA to Rapid City is 40 mics. Airspace is clear. Welcome to the safe zone, folks. Rapid City. The Dakotas. The stable zone." They said the craton there, the geological heart of the continent, was holding. They said there was power. They said there was water. I leaned my head back against the vibrating fuselage. I thought about the house in the Heights, the mortgage I had worried about for 10 years, the lawn I had mowed, the coffee cup I had left on the control desk at the water plant. It was all gone. Not just destroyed, erased. The geography of my life had been rewritten in 72 hours. But I looked at the cargo bay again. I had the pack. I had the rifle. I had the dog. And I had the 2 people breathing rhythmically across the aisle. The earth had broken its contract with us. It had proven that the solid ground was just a temporary arrangement. But we had written a new contract. A contract of movement, of adaptation, of refusal to surrender. I closed my eyes. The vibration of the helicopter felt different than the vibration of the earthquake. It didn't feel like death. It felt like a heartbeat. We were homeless. We were battered. We were flying into a future that was going to be hard, cold, and uncertain. But we were flying. And for tonight, that was enough. And that is where the story of the fracture shift begins. Not with the end of the world, but with the survival of the first few. Elias, Sarah, and Emily made it to the Dakotas. But the shifting of the tectonic plates was just the opening move. What happens when the Ice Age sets in? What happens when the borders are redrawn not by politicians, but by lava flows? That is a story for another night. If you've listened this far, thank you. You are part of the survival team now. If you enjoyed this journey, if you felt the cold of the ash and the heat of the fire, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. It's the only signal flare we have left. And turn on notifications, because when the next broadcast comes through, you won't want to miss the warning. Comment below. Tell me what you would have grabbed in those first 5 minutes. Would you have taken the water, the gun, or the photo album? I'm Beckett Voss, signing off. Keep your eyes on the horizon. And remember, don't look down.